Look at that dog. He could not care any less about what I'm making in here. Living his best life. Eating mud, going where he shouldn't. What a life. Meanwhile, inside I've got a lot of stock to prep, and I'm gonna check the max thickness I can aim for the top of my bench. And that ended up to be 31 millimeters. As I was running through the thickness planer, I remembered I'm sort of poor for a phase 2 domino. Which means, unless I want to spend a lot of time measuring out dowel holes, I'm gonna have to make a jig. It was at this point that I remembered I do have a nail gun. Didn't really need it, the glue would have been more than strong enough, but I decided I'm going to use it so that I can feel like a professional using a nail gun. Also letting it dry, I used my favorite little square to make sure that it, was square. Yep, I still haven't replaced my drill yet. So I'm using an impact driver with some hex bits to drill the holes. That will be the guides for the dowels. Might also be useful to mention, if you haven't made a, probably much better, dowel jig yourself in the past, this one I'm making will be specific for the thickness of my top, which is 31mm. Now, I wouldn't normally check grain alignment for workshop furniture, but one of my favorite woodworkers on YouTube called Curtis has made me paranoid about grain alignment. After marking out where I'm going to put my dowels, I decided to be brave and go ahead and use my dowel jig for the first time on my actual stock, instead of first doing a test run, as a normal sane person would. Let's just pretend I'm holding the impact driver at a nice, clean 90 degrees here. I promise I pay more attention when making furniture. I also don't wear any sweatpants while making furniture. Probably. Maybe. Luckily this time, things seem to have worked out on the first try. The dowel jig did the trick and the alignment looks good. For those that have not used dowels for making tabletops before, which is probably no one watching, they are indeed not required for a strong edge joint. Just like an admittedly utterly sexy phase 2 domino is not required for a stronger edge joint. However, it helps a lot with alignment. If your stock is not prepped properly, or you are working with cup boards, it does help to get things aligned and get it flat. Now, I know what you're thinking, and you're absolutely right. I should have spread that glue evenly across the surface, and I have no good excuse for that, except overwhelming laziness. After dropping a very heavy pipe clamp on my toes, uttering a few new Dutch words I've learned recently, and admitting to myself that is what I get for wearing slippers in my workshop, I was happy to see the first half of the top looking good. After getting the second half of the top also glued up and dried, it is now time to join the two halves, which is where I have a problem. I don't own clamps long enough. I spent a lot of time in the shower thinking about this, and thought I had the perfect, extremely clever tactic to join them together without using clamps. After that failing miserably, I decided to let two of my clamps hold hands and embrace the tabletop like a cup of hot chocolate embrace you on a cold winter night. I didn't design this bench on SketchUp, Blender, or even just paper beforehand. It was all in my head, which I found out during this build to be utterly unreliable and silly to do. And so I'm planning out my design for my feet and stretchers here, confident that I have just created a masterpiece design. How naive young Yaku was. I'm going to need to make many mortise and tenon joints. Why do you ask? Well, I'm glad you asked. It's because I have a weird allergy to use screws. I avoid them like the plague. I don't know who hurt me, but now I like to hurt myself more. which is why I'm making more than 20 mortise and tenon joints for this bolt. I don't have a fancy track saw yet, so I'm using the track for my circular saw in combination with 2 squares to cut the front and back nice and flat. Spoiler alert, it's a bad idea to have your tabletop already perfectly cut to size before you have actually built your base, especially when it becomes a bit more of a complex bolt with no proper prior plan and more than 20 mortise and tenon joints. Here I am cutting out the part of the top that is going to drop down for my table saw to stand on, so that the table saw can be attached to it and be on the same height as the rest of the table. Why am I sawing this last bit off without properly securing it, and why on earth would I think it then a good idea to break the last bit off? I'll let you know if I find the answer to that. That there is the face of someone that knows what they did and dying inside because of it. Time for one of my least favorite parts of woodworking, sanding. I'll spare you in the pain and skip over most of it. Now it is time to start gluing the legs. I paired up more than one leg in one set of clamps because of limited amount of clamps and space. I was quite worried about the glue that got onto my workbench, as I normally put something beneath before I glue up. I was pleasantly surprised though, with how well the hard wax oil I put on my workbench handled it. The glue came off extremely easily actually, which means there was likely no lasting damage or actually any sign of it being there afterwards. Using the worst possible angle I could possibly find to film this, I'm using my hand plane to get the excess glue off the feet and reduce the amount of sanding I need to do. Planing is definitely a lot more fun and way more satisfying than sanding. I promise some sexy cinematic planing shots for the next video. Remember those 20 odd mortise and tenon joints I had to make? Yeah, I've decided I'm going to rather bolt yet another jig and make them on the table saw instead of by hand. I will pretend it is only because of time and not at all because I'm lazy. I mean, I must know what I'm doing, right? Since I'm using a nail gun again. While that is drying, I started cutting some of the shoulders on my table saw using a very, perhaps too basic, crosscut slate and clamping an offcut to use as a stop lock. This is the first time I'm making mortise and tenon joints on the table saw instead of using hand tools. I was quite surprised and impressed with how much faster it goes. It did take some trial and error to get into the groove. I also realized later on that it is better, at least in my scenario, with this crosscut slate, to cut the tenons first before doing the shoulders, unlike what I'm doing here. I could have most likely removed the need for clamp here if I added a fence at the back of the jig, but for now I was quite happy just using the clamp and table saw. I have a bit of cleanup work to do with the chisel, but overall quite happy for my first time doing it on the table saw, and still faster by a few weeks compared to doing it by hand. So win-win. I know a lot of you are probably thinking I'm a bit crazy to build this table saw bench out of solid wood instead of plywood or MDF, but similar to my allergy to screws, I have an unexplainable big love for solid wood. I just love the feel of it under my hands, working with it, even the smell of it, even the act of applying oil to solid wood at the end of a project brings me about the same amount of joy as hiding a fart in public. I want to use my small handheld router for cleaning out the mortises, and since I don't have any track for it, I bought a small jig for it, and I'll be using that to try and get most of the mortises done with just a router. After marking out the final length for the feet, I used my crosscut slate to cut the feet to length, and this is a prime example of why I'm prioritizing this build for my workshop, because the table saw on this plastic bench is not only too high for making safe cuts, but it's also quite unstable. So here I'm having to use my feet to hook around the bench to keep the table saw from moving forward and falling over. I am nothing if not consistent. The same horrible angle while planing. After all the legs were done, I laid them out on the tabletop to plan out the stretcher lengths. It is also at this point that I realized my first big mistake of not planning the bolt out properly. I won't be able to put a stretcher between the two legs in the back of the table saw, meaning the middle legs. However, I was confident that the rest of the stretchers and the mortise tenons that were going into the tabletop would provide enough strength and stability. I didn't have enough wood left to make the stretchers as thick as I would have liked, so I had to split the wood I had left in half to have enough. It is of course still more than strong enough. Each stretcher could still hold my full body weight and then some, but what can I say? I'm a fan of overkill. The cuts for these tenons for the stretchers would have been a bit too sketchy on the table saw because of the length, so I decided to pull out the good old Japanese saw to cut them. I was quite happy to see I am still able to make a hand-out cut. There's just something about using traditional hand tools without any electricity that just speaks to my soul. Look at those nice clean cuts. Now, might not look pretty, it's not perfect, but the router jigs did the job for the most part, and I was able to route out all the mortises with it. Afterwards, I of course had to clean out the corners with the chisel to get it nice and square. And the benefit of a mortise and tenon with a nice shoulder is that it also hides tiny imperfections that you might have, no matter how dirty your hole is. Here I positioned the feet upside down against the bottom of the tabletop to mark out the mortises that I need to cut for the feet. It's also getting the base glued to the stretchers that I realized my second big mistake. The table saw's rack and pinion fence's track would need to go through the tenon of the middle leg. So I had to cut half of the tenon away with a handsaw. I was quite frustrated with this, so sadly I don't have any footage of this. Finishing the base here with the same hard wax oil I have used on my workbench, after seeing the stellar performance it delivered with the wood glue removal. And yes, that is my shame all. The mortise that is no longer going to be used. I'm doing the same here as before, marking out my mortises on the base of the table saw base. I stacked as many heavy things as I could find on it after gluing it to make sure it stays put. And this was a result of my previous mistake I mentioned earlier. I should have cut the top down to size after fitting into the base. But luckily it's only shop furniture, and it serves as a constant reminder to keep that in mind. At least the solution to my mistake came out quite well. The fence's track is sliding into its hole quite smoothly. The table saw was about 2 mm below the height of the table, but luckily this plywood was exactly that thickness. The last mistake, I promise. After marking out the tracks, I routed them out by using an offcut and the help of a square and lamps as a guide. This router has such bad dust extraction that I eventually just removed the dust vents because I couldn't see where I was routing. At least it felt smooth. This is the result of skimping on a shop vac. Don't make the same mistake as I did. Make sure to get a proper shop vac as a base for everything else. I only got my Festool shop vac after the filming of this video. Well, the pieces of plywood did its job quite well, and the table saw is now nice and even with the rest of the table. Again I managed to get to one of the worst angles to show one of the best parts, applying the hard wax oil. Now, I know it's only spruce, no fancy walnut, but it's still fantastic to see the grain pop like this after applying some oil. Final step is just to fasten the table saw to the base with some nice thick screws. Yeah, I know, it's a sad day when screws are the only option. If you're still here, thank you so much for your time and support. I truly appreciate you. In the future I will likely add some drawers on the bottom of the table. I'm really excited to start using this and to show you just the big improvement this has made. And to start building my ever-growing list of projects, including a lounge chair for the client, coming soon. I would appreciate a like and a subscribe, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.